أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inshallah, today we will be continuing on the 27th word, which has been on the topic of ijtihad these last few weeks. And in this text, Nursi began with saying that while the door of ijtihad is open, there are 6 obstacles to it at the present. And the last several weeks, those 6 points or 6 obstacles have been discussed and talked about. And I guess in one respect, much of the discussion, one of the primary points has been that the purpose of ijtihad is for the good of the people, for the sake of establishing people's relationship with the Creator, right? That at this time that we are in, the fundamentals, the very fundamentals are missing or are unstable or not firm. And today we'll continue with the conclusion, and I'll start reading the text, inshallah. So, Bismillah. Sacred laws change according to the ages. Indeed, in one age, different prophets may come, and they have come. Since subsequent to the seal of the prophets, his greater Sharia is sufficient for all peoples in every age, no need has remained for different laws. However, in secondary matters, the need for different schools has persisted to a degree. Just as clothes change with the change of the seasons, and medicines change according to dispositions, so sacred laws change according to the ages, and their ordinances change according to the capacities of peoples. Because the secondary matters of the ordinances of the Sharia look to human circumstances, they come according to them and are like medicine. I'm just going to reread 1 or 2 sentences here. Since subsequent to the seal of the prophets, his greater Sharia is sufficient for all peoples in every age, no need has remained for different laws. However, in secondary matters, the need for different schools has persisted to a degree. Right. So in terms of secondary matters of the ordinances of the Sharia, which look to human circumstances, they come according to them and are like medicine. At the time of the early prophets, since social classes were far apart and men's characters were both somewhat coarse and violent, and their minds primitive and close to nomadism, the laws at that time came all in different forms appropriate to their conditions. There were even different prophets and laws in the same continent in the same century. Then, since with the coming of the prophets of the end of time, man has though advanced from the primary to the secondary stage, and through numerous revolutions and upheavals, reached a position at which all the human peoples could receive a single lesson and listen to a single teacher and act in accordance with a single law. No need remained for different laws, neither was there necessity for different teachers. But because they were not at all completely the same level and did not proceed in the same sort of social life, the schools of law became numerous. If, like students of a school of higher education, the vast majority of mankind were clothed in the same sort of social life and attained the same level, then all the schools could be united. But just as the state of the world does not permit that, so the schools of law cannot be the same. So I guess so far, I mean, it's a conclusion, so it's kind of perhaps wrapping up on the topic, but the main emphasis that I am getting from here is that with the seal of the prophets, right, with the coming of the prophet at the end of time, that at one level, what he says as greater Sharia, there is this sort of, perhaps this is not the right terminology, but like baseline that is applicable and sufficient for everyone, regardless of context or time, and so on. As it said in this second paragraph, that a single lesson could be received. But at the same time, he's saying that in terms of secondary matters, and I like the example of medicine, there can be nuances to circumstances, and these secondary matters do look to human circumstance and come according to them. And so there will be end up different, I guess, applications, or as it elaborates here, but further schools of law. But at the same time, the school of law does not, I guess, mean that the lesson at its core is different, right? Or that the teacher is different. As says, no need remained for different laws, neither was there necessity for different teachers. But that, I mean, we could perhaps elaborate what this means of same level. I mean, I can understand sort of a human circumstance, but I'm not sure what level quite means when it comes to the notion of law in one sense. But if, like, students of a school of higher education, the vast majority of mankind were clothed in the same sort of social life, attain the same level, then all the schools could be united. I guess, again, it's trying to touch upon, like, Nursi's trying to touch upon the fact that there are different perhaps circumstances, different spheres of life that people are in, and that these differing schools of law address the varying circumstances and spheres that people or communities find themselves in, even if they all do look to that same teacher. I'll continue because I think the question and answer that's going to come is going to elaborate further, but if anyone has comments, they can always jump in. He continues to say, if you say the truth is one, right? So how can the different ordinances of the 4 and 12 schools be true? Perhaps what does that mean for them to be different, but still look to the same truth, if you will? The answer, the same water governs in 5 different ways and 5 ill people of different disposition. Okay, so we're continuing with the medicine analogy, which again is useful. Thus, for one, the water is a cure for his illness, and according to medicine, necessary. For another, it is like poison for his sickness and harmful and medically prohibited. For another, it causes a small amount of harm and is reprehensible medically. For another, the water is beneficial and without harm. According to medicine, that is sunnah for him. And for yet another, it is neither harmful nor beneficial. He can drink it with good health, and for him, it is medically permissible. So I guess there are these 5 ways. One is of necessity, one is of prohibition, one is of reprehensibility, another one is of beneficiality, let's say, And the fifth one is about permissibility. Thus, here the truth has become numerous. All five are true. Are you able to say the water is only a cure? The water is only a cure, only necessary, and it governs in no other way. So I guess the point that's being made here is that, the essence of water doesn't change, but that the circumstances, human circumstances, can be such that one, let's say, ordinance or aspect of law, perhaps, right, is appropriate and useful and beneficial, whereas in another one, it could be completely reprehensible. I like the water example. Perhaps it would be useful to also think about it in like the practical terms of actual law here, but if someone has that sort of example, that could be useful. Are you able to say the water is only a cure, only necessary, and it governs in no other way? Yeah, Brother Yusuf, do you want to chime in?
He's going to give an example about that, I think, for wudu and what violates wudu. So, for instance, like touching the opposite sex, is it going to violate the wudu or not? So, is it permissible? Because it's permissible in one madhab while it is forbidden in another. So, he is telling us, he's going to explain how it applies to this example here.
Yeah, I mean, he's touching upon, I guess, the justification or the coexistence of different madahib, right? And I guess we'll see it in the wudu. I do have questions on this matter, but we'll see if they remain after his explanation. Similarly, impelled by divine wisdom, the divine ordinances change according to the schools of law and those who follow them. And they change as truth, and all are true and right. For example, since in accordance with divine wisdom and determining, the majority of those who follow Imam Shafi are closer to village life and nomadism than the Hanafis, and are lacking in social life, which makes the community like a single body. Each person recites the Fatiha behind the prayer leader so as to himself express his pains at the court of the dispenser of needs and utter his private wishes. And this is absolutely right and pure wisdom. However, since most Islamic governments favored the school of Imam Azam, the great majority of those who follow that school are closer to civilization and town life and more fitted for social life. Thus, the community becomes like a single individual, and one man speaks in the name of all. All affirm him with their hearts and bind their hearts to his, and his word becomes the word of all. According to the Hanafi school, the Fatiha is not recited behind the prayer leader, and its not being recited is absolutely right and pure wisdom. This is an interesting explanation. So in terms of, I guess, like reciting Fatiha and Jamaat, right? Those who are Shafi, and he says, are lacking social life, making the community like a single body. Each person recites the Fatiha behind the prayer leader so as to express. And then those favoring the school of Imam Azam, the great majority of those who follow that school are close to civilization. And one man speaks in the name of all. According to the Hanafi school, the Fatiha is not recited behind the prayer leader. I'm not quite sure if this fully resonates with me. especially because I mean I've heard this explanation before, not just in terms of reciting Fatiha or not, but as like a sort of again justification for the existence of different madahib, right? Of why, let's say, as you were saying, and maybe this will come, like, you know, if one's finger bleeds, that nullifies wudu or not, or touching the skin or the hand of the opposite gender, if that nullifies it or not, etc., etc. But like, I don't know if the argument coming from location makes as much sense to me. I mean, I can imagine that in some circumstances, you know, those who live in a village might have very different circumstances than those that live in a city. But at least, I mean, the world is very globalized at this point. You know, we have people of different schools all living in the same city or the same town. Then does this become just a matter that, oh, they can change it according to their circumstance, but we kind of adopt the school of law that you know, our family usually raises us with, if we come from that background. Like, what I'm not sure about is this sort of argument coming from location. Maybe I have to think about it a little bit more, but Brother Yusuf, you can go ahead.
So I think it's not necessarily a location, but it's a lifestyle that the author is mentioning. So the village-like people is living a certain life in general, and people of city is living a certain life. So it's about a lifestyle. I think what's being mentioned in here is, if you like, cultural background, or maybe not even cultural, but the lifestyle that you live in and the limitations that the society imposes in such a setup. So life conditions. So it's about that. And as a follow-up to this, I guess, yes, you can, like, if you were born into a village and get used to that lifestyle, but then let's say you move to a city, then I think it's perfectly fine to change your madhab, saying that now this is more fitting to me. So I started with following Imam Shafi'i. Now I'm going to start following Abu Hanifa. So that's perfectly fine. But in general, let's also go back to how did this madhahib came out? Because the text is not explicitly mentioning this. Well, it did implicitly at the very beginning, but all of these madhahib are taking their rules from Quran and how Rasulullah implemented it. And we also know that Quran is not the only revelation that Rasulullah received with Jibreel alayhi salam. So he was instructed with certain details which are not explicitly spoken in Quran, like implicitly they are there, but explicitly the details are, we learn it from the Messenger ﷺ. So what those madhahib did was, Rasulullah did several applications of the same thing. And those madhahib are taking their rules from narrations coming from Rasulullah. So when Imam Shafi'i says you cannot touch the opposite gender, it's going to violate your wudu, this comes from one application of Rasulullah. When Abu Hanifa says, well, it's permissible, this again comes from another narration. So what is the point then? Because apparently it looks like Rasulullah did both in different circumstances. But what is the, or let's say, where did the need for canonizing those rules came from? I guess this might be a relevant question here. It looks like it is about how literate we are and how capable we are in terms of understanding Prophet's way of living. And from the beginning, he said that he was making the point that we are so much illiterate about this, like extracting meaning from extracting ruling from revelation and from narrations. We are so illiterate about this. The author have been mentioning this since the very beginning. So he says, this is why you would need to rely on the people that came before you who were much more talented and had a better environment, which was more suitable to be able to do so. And even on those early days, not everybody did try to extract meaning and come up with rulings. People were wise enough to go and ask, even at the time of Sahaba, they were going and asking imams within Sahaba. So if they didn't know, they were accepting this. Okay, we live together with Rasulullah, that's okay, that's correct. But I have a question and I cannot simply say, oh, I am Sahabi like him, so I can make my comment about this. This was not the attitude. They were going and asking to the scholars within Sahabi, like Aisha radiallahu anha or Abdullah ibn Umar. So they will go and ask to those names, or Abu Huraira. So these were the people and many more, which were the scholars of that age. And this tradition continued. Like, it's not that people were courageously saying that, oh, this is how I do it and I will do it. But scholars, certain scholars canonized, if you like, compiled rulings and said that let's make it easy for the following generations to be able to follow it. Like, for example, another similar attempt to this one is the famous 40 Hadith. This is not about Sharia ruling now, but it's about there's a large literature of Hadith, but people are not able to dive into that, like volumes and volumes of Hadith narrations. So Imam Nawawi says, here are the 40 Hadith, which you should at least know about these, and he makes it available for the people, like the normal common people of the Ummah, which is a big service actually. So likewise, when it comes to the law, Sharia, those first generation scholars, and these are from the Tabi'in this started with, they canonized those rulings, and eventually 4 of them became central, if you like. There are more than 4, but the 4 that we know of are, over the centuries, these 4 remain to be followed by large groups of people. And this is, and the author in here is saying that since you cannot come up with something as such, go and follow one of them. But one question that comes to my mind here is, since the beginning, the author was saying that command should not be replaced with wisdom. Or he didn't use the word command, he said a reason, but reason in there was like command. So illah should not be, hikmah should not be replaced with illah, as using the technical terminology there. So is author in here providing wisdom to justify something, or what's going on in here? So I think what's going on in here is the author says the reason that I will follow these people is because I need to follow messenger, and the chain of messengerhood is coming to me towards these scholarly figures. So I'm going to follow them. This is the reason I will follow them. But this doesn't prevent me from searching for wisdom within here. This is what the questioner was saying, oh, how come truth is going to change? He says, well, he gave the example that you mentioned, this water, how it is different, its value is different according to different natures or different diseases. So likewise, details, not the main points, but details of Sharia law also applies differently to different people. And in his life, Rasulullah had this elasticity, if you like, when applying them according to the nature of people. And those scholars that came later on just canonized them. Otherwise, they didn't say, although this is not an application in Rasulullah's life, but let's do it as such. This is not the case for example, when we talk about the wudu here. This is why there is like those certain methodology within the fiqh to say either you extract it from revelation or from narrations, or you observe a consensus, or if it's not visible, like it's a brand new thing which didn't happen at the time of Rasulullah, then they go with the comparison. So this is why it's not that nothing is being made up here. And just the author in here is saying that these differences are made because they were necessary for people of different nature and different circumstances. And so as long as those differences remains, such madhahib should remain. And people could follow difference. But again, coming back to your question, yeah, you started with Imam Shafi because you were born into a town and whatnot, and the people around you historically had been following it for a good reason. But then the circumstances changed over time. You moved into a city and whatnot, and you wanted to change. That's perfectly fine, is what I would say.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for that. Yeah, I guess just a few thoughts as I sort through my thoughts a bit. Like there is the question, and you kind of address this, the question of canonization, right? And I guess like, are we to treat the canonization then as templates to be adopted according to the matching circumstance that we find ourselves in? And how do we determine if our circumstance does match or not? Is it again just a matter of lifestyle / location? Are these matters then flexible if one's circumstances constantly change? Yeah, I mean, yeah, your comment was very helpful in just kind of situating this conversation. But I guess I'm wondering about like the, for lack of again better word, rigidity, or the rigidity or potential rigidity that is required in practical application or not required. Is that a new hand, Brother Yusuf? If so, you can.
Oh, yes. So with the tone of this text, the way that it's written, like I can take that the question that you asked can be taken in two ways. One is, well, what if, let's say, half of the year I am living in a town, half of the year I am living in a city? Can I switch back and forth and whatnot? Oh, my dear Imam, could you please help me with that? It becomes like a legal question. Or in a similar vein, let's say, oh, what if the society is in like 500 years down the road, the society is going to become centralized and we are going to start forming colonies in Mars. How does this treatise would apply to there? So, I mean, your question is not in that line of thought, but I don't think this treatise is addressing such a thing either, because the way this treatise is written, I think it's saying that this is, if it truly becomes your problem, then you can find answer to those questions by asking to scholars around you. Just if this truly becomes your problem, but what this text is saying, that establish that trust to those scholars and don't try to come up with answers by yourselves in such matters, because in this sense you are not at a position really to extract meaning for yourself by yourself. There had been experts on this matter, which came in the previous, much early generations, and your attitude or your enthusiasm to come up with your own interpretation in matters of law, maybe it's not coming out of a need or necessity, but just some sort of an excitement to open up a new space for yourself. And this is sort of going against the concept of being an abd. So just be careful and question that aspect of your life. Is the picture that I am receiving from this text? But other than that, let's say, to whatever extent you do, as much as you feel like honestly and sincerely, you are trying to be the best of an abd as you can. But then, yeah, you are traveling back and forth between town and the city and whatever, like your conditions are constantly changing. Then what can I do? This becomes a question which I believe is now outside of the scope of this text, if that makes sense.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, as you said it, I have to, when asking certain questions, I have to reorient myself in terms of where is this question coming from? And is it coming from a point of need? Like, is this a need? Is this a genuine need that I have? And if so, then I can find the appropriate, place to resolve that need, perhaps. But if it's not coming from a need, then it becomes, it kind of meanders onto theoretics. Although this topic of schools of law is very much so governed with the circumstance of human needs, I guess. Like, it's very much based on the tug and pull of human needs. And so questions that might approach it without that tug and pull of human needs, it kind of misses the purpose of the very topic that we're talking about. So yeah, that was helpful, and that's sort of what I got out of it. I guess one other question let me ask here before I continue is, so, Nursi here is saying, like, for those who follow Imam Shafi, may recite the Fatiha behind the prayer leader so as to himself express his pains at the court of the dispenser of needs and utter his private wishes, and that those who follow Abu Hanifa may not recite it, and that the Imam's word becomes the word of all. But I'm not, like, is Nursi just kind of offering one line of, like, it sounds kind of nice or pretty, but I'm not quite sure, like, what exactly things like the recitation of Fatiha then are based upon, when it seems very much removed from, like, how does lifestyle impact an individual recitation or collective recitation? How does that, and I guess, is that then just a matter that, people like Imam Shafi, the experts, right, would have been deliberating over themselves, because it gets into the theory behind the law. But I guess that's just like a question that I had. Again, I don't think perhaps the purpose of this text is necessarily to answer it, but he does, after all, kind of invite the question by offering this sort of brief reasoning. And so I'm just wondering that. But yeah, Brother Yusuf, go ahead.
So although I don't know about how those two rules are extracted, but based on how I guess these rules are generally extracted, there must exist two separate narrations. In one, Sahabi would be reciting Fatiha behind the Prophet, and either Rasulullah would confirm it verbally or would stay silent. And in another narration, it must be that some Sahabi didn't recite Fatiha behind the Imam, and Rasulullah get to know this, yet either confirmed it or didn't object it, meaning a silent confirmation. So, meaning in practice, both must have been observed and approved by the messenger. Now, these two imams one of them is preferring one narration, the other one is preferring the other narration. But why? So what motivates them to choose one over the other is the question here. And Nursi's take in that is, it's about the concept of being a Jamara is different within, if you say, Bedouin mindset versus the city mindset. And actually, I can relate to that when I compare the people that I know, let's say, in the Turkey, the Eastern Turkey is more village-like people, and the Western Turkey is more city people. And I would observe, as like several examples, that the village people are more like, how to say, they are taking individual responsibility. Because in the eastern part of the country, the government, like it's like mountainous region, government is not accessible to every corner. And so people need to protect themselves. And like the police, soldier is not too much in there. So people in those rural areas take the responsibility of protecting upon themselves, and they do their own job. They work in the farm and whatnot. So they are very much accustomed to make decisions by themselves and act accordingly. But when you go to the west of the country where the city life is there, people are very much relying on the collective power. So they would stay behind. If something wrong happens, they would go and report it to some authorities, which would take care of them. So in one side, the way conversations happen is individual level. In the other side, the collective city life, it is, they do it within a group. So they say it to some authority who is going to take care of them. So when it comes to the prayer, then we need to question what is the role of making prayer in Jamara. So why was this so much suggested, recommended, strongly recommended by the Prophet ﷺ, saying that doing prayer in Jamara is 27 times more valuable than doing it by yourself? It looks like even the concept of Jamara is, although it is like a collective thing, still the understanding of Jamara differs for the rural people versus city people. And this is why this must have been the case in front of the messenger when he was living, and he observed that the people who are accustomed to rural or Bedouin type of living, still they will do the prayer together, but they will utter it by themselves. And he said that's okay, that's acceptable, permissible. It's good for them because this is their style. This is what they got accustomed to. If they have a problem, they would try to resolve it by themselves. This is their lifestyle. But when he sees the city people, if they are standing behind an imam, they would say, oh, imam is speaking on behalf of us. So in this case, we are going to stay silent. And he says, yeah, this fits their way of living better. So, but this is happening when they are praying together in Jamara. For example, if that person later in the night praying by himself, herself, he's going to recite Fatiha because now he is directly speaking to his creator. There is no imam in front of him to follow in this case. So that person recites Fatiha in this case. But the consciousness of congregation, what does it mean? It means a certain thing for the people of the city. It means another thing for the people of rural areas. And this is what Nursi in here says is perfectly fitting their personalities, and it has a place in Sharia as well. This is what I understand.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair. That makes a lot of sense. And that answers my question. So I'm going to continue, inshallah, if there are no other comments or questions. And for example, since through forming a barrier against the assaults of nature, the Sharia modifies it and trains the evil commanding soul according to the Shafi'i school, most of whose followers are villagers, semi-nomadic, and occupied in manual labor. Ablutions are spoiled by touching a woman. The slightest uncleanliness is harmful. While according to the Hanafi school, since the great majority of its followers have entered social life and become semi-civilized, touching women does not spoil the ablutions, and there is license for a small amount of uncleanliness. The text is inspiring certain questions, but again, I don't know if it's veering off the purpose of the text and how much use there is to.
Oh, by the way, I didn't mean to intimidate you. Like, feel free to ask your questions. I made that comment because I heard a similar question by somebody else 2 weeks before. So it was a more general answer. So please feel free to ask whatever you have a question.
I am just kind of like trying to orient myself in terms of what the purpose of the text is. But at the same time, I mean, because the text is touching upon, schools of law and their practices, it ends up inevitably raising questions about the nature of those laws, which just warrants this much larger discussion about like what is uncleanliness and what have you. But here, I guess, again, like as Brother Yusuf had explained as well, the context, the lifestyle of these different the lifestyles that are in mind within these different schools of laws, and how they are all essentially rooted in the prophetic practices, right? Are here to show me how, I guess, I can practice live my ubudiyya, live in a state of worshipful response to my Creator, no matter what circumstance that I am in. And that these physical practices that schools of law, that one madhab or another madhab may offer, are sort of, I guess, expedients or ways of manifesting that state of ubudiyya as was exemplified by the Prophet. And I think that's sort of key when engaging in discussions like this, right? So here, as it says, like for the Shafi school, ablution may be spoiled by just touching a person of the opposite gender, and what necessitates, I guess, ablution, I would say, is also a question of what necessitates a recentering of one's God consciousness, right? And that this sort of changes within the context of where I am and what I'm occupied with and how my day-to-day life plays out, if you will. So, in a, as it says, in a village life, in a semi-nomadic life, touching a person of the opposite gender may require ablution. It may require recentering of my God consciousness, right? Because that's something that's not encountered frequently. But in a, as it says, in a setting where social life is much more common, then it might not have the same impact on my own sort of state of being, if you will. That's my comment for that section. Now we shall consider a manual worker and a gentleman. Due to his craft and the manner of his livelihood, a worker is afflicted with mixing with and being in contact with women who are canonically strangers to him, or vice versa. A woman is afflicted with mixing with men who are strangers to her. Since he sits at the same hearth as them and is involved with unclean things, nature and his evil commanding soul find the field empty and may attack him. Therefore, in order to form a barrier against such attacks, the Sharia states concerning them, your ablutions will be spoilt, do not touch the woman. Your prayers will be invalid, do not be tainted. A heavenly voice rings in his or her spiritual ears, whereas in accordance with social custom and in the name of common morality, the gentleman, on condition he is honorable, is not afflicted with being in contact with women who are canonically strangers to him, and in the name of cleanliness of civilization, he is not tainted to any degree with unclean things. Therefore, in the Hanafi school, the Sharia has not shown him harshness and censure. It has shown its permissive side and lightened it. If your hand has been touched, your ablutions are not spoiled. If you are ashamed and do not perform the istinja in public, there is no harm in it. A small amount of uncleanliness is permitted. It saves him from scruples. Thus, 2 drops from the ocean as examples for you. Make analogies with them, and if you can, balance them on the scales of the Sharia in this way, with the balance of Shahrani's Mizan. Before I continue into the dua, are there any comments or questions on this portion of the text? This is conclusion of this lengthy discussion on ijtihad and the 6 obstacles of it. And here in this conclusion, he's been talking about how secondary matters of the Sharia can warrant changes in practices or require the madahib, system, right? Given the differences and changes of human circumstance, lifestyle, setting, etc., and that all of this is sort of in accordance with both divine wisdom and command, right, and the practices of the Prophet, as was transmitted to us through the scholars. But I'll pause and see if there are any comments or questions.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Yes, Isinur, how are you? Assalamu alaikum. So yes, I think just in general, 2 things come to mind whenever I have read texts from Pakistan written by imams or muftis. There is a very famous book called A Woman of Paradise, and then a couple of others that, how you can be a very obedient and devout woman, and people in general, based on liberalism and the weakness of arguments made in there regarding women and cleanliness or uncleanliness, or their secrecy in terms of being veiled and staying at home, and expression of themselves in marriage or in sexuality, halal even, everything is debatable by men. And so I always refer back, as my late husband used to refer me, we're all adults and keeping our sanctity as brothers and sisters here, not to contest with the wording here. Maybe at that point when the imams who got together and the mazahib, as the scholars were delineating the rulings around different common and private laws around people's lives matters, the wording is where I think we are getting lost. So just like in the Surah Nisa, a lot of times, and a couple of other places, like the story of Job, one of the verses is around, and he asked him to beat his wife with a little bit of like taking grass and strike the wife with the bundle of grass. So anytime there is intimacy involved and Sharia laws around it, anytime there is women's corrective sort of a ruling that maybe they are not listening to you, they're gossiping, they're backbiting, they're asking for money and material world comforts, or God forbid, they are being assessed and judged for their sincerity towards the men in their lives. My question comes up to the idea that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that in Quran, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also himself is such a big example of how he treated women, even the worst of the worst cases, how he treated them or kindly treated them, then to my mind there is no place of, like other religions, isolating women when it comes to men approaching them and being clean afterwards or not. Allah Ta'ala gave a straightforward ruling that if you have been intimate with each other in your marriage, then get up and take a shower and do your wudu again and do a ghusl again. So it's as simple as that. Both husband and wife will get up and get a ghusl. And so this whole understanding of don't approach, either we are talking about a very celibate life, then we're coming in touch with the spouse is in an unspoken way considered as if it is interfering with the ibadah or with the solitude that comes with Sufism or that comes with being a pious person. Allah doesn't say that leave dunya like that or relationships. So that's where I always get a little bit worried that whoever is speaking and giving these, first by the virtue of the fact that only men are speaking and their writings are being taken into account, and then who is based on a consultation approving them, there is no mention of what women might think about this. So I always go back to either the life history of Hazrat Aisha Raziyallahu Ta'ala anha around female issues and matters for women, where perhaps we can get a glimpse of what Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam may have told her about how the women-related issues are to be understood, from midwives to breastfeeding mothers and intimacy issues with bondswomen and respectable equal status women and second, third marriages and widows and their behaviors and their even Allah Ta'ala says even to this that don't have a secret intention to marry someone. So that means Allah Ta'ala is according respect to the person towards whom a particular intention is, so that nothing gets done against their will. So I don't think that my Rabb is going to say that, that women are unclean. Unfortunately, I find that to be a little bit disturbing, because we do see in other faiths that we have similar injunctions, and hence in Christianity and in Hinduism, we see that women are, and also in Judaism, that women and intimacy with women is almost considered like, in the more puritanical orthodox sense, a dirty interaction. If Allah Ta'ala says that there's mercy and comfort amongst husbands and wives, then I think it's only logical to realize that cleanliness obviously follows in this regard after consummation of a marital relationship. And if we were to reach too much deeper into it and get to say nothing to it and allow complacently the feminism and the liberalism to take it out of context and start misconstruing that Islam is as a faith not able to appreciate women as clean, then then I wouldn't have anything to add to it. I'll be very disappointed that somebody runs away with this kind of an interpretation, no matter what mazhab it is coming from. And then same issue is around temporary marriages. So temporary marriage is not for sexual desires. It is actually respecting the woman and not having a secret relationship with a woman. I'd be interested in knowing that how all four mazahib, take that. Whereas clearly there are rulings around it in Quran and Allah's words, and Nabi Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam's examples are clear. So whenever the jurisprudence with after Hadith and after Quranic verses is brought up, my yardstick to evaluate its and even begin to understand its merits is again going to be the paradigm of Quran and Sunnah. It's not going to be just because some sheikh and some mufti and some imam and some scholar got up and said that this is right and this is not right, whereas clearly we have understanding about this from available in Quran and available in Sunnah. Jazakallah khair. I hope I haven't offended anyone.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Sister Sarah. Yeah, I think we should all feel comfortable to voice our thoughts and our comments and our questions in these settings. So I welcome that. Before I say anything, I saw that Brother Atik has his hand up. So if you'd like to go ahead, please do.
Thank you, Sister Sarah, for expressing your concerns. I agree. I understand how, maybe this type of, being told you got to make wudu or do some sort of ritual after you touch a woman, or maybe vice versa, can seem to like denigrate the other gender or something like that. But I think something that I noticed, obviously I'm no expert, is that it mentions that, if you see on the lower quarter of this of the paragraph or whatever, so like if your hand has been touched, then you don't have to perform the istinja, and istinja is not right. It's not your regular wudu. It relates more to, let's say, maybe a discharge or something like that. So I think that gives it a little bit more context towards why wudu or some sort of cleaning was prescribed, because maybe nowadays no one's really having a discharge when they're in contact with a woman, but maybe in some other time that could have possibly been a thing. And maybe that has something to do with why in our semi-civilized culture or society, this we've been given an exemption from that. So it seems to me it's not like as much of a like spiritual thing. It has like physical context, but I could be misinterpreting it.
Brother Yusuf, please go ahead.
So I felt like there might be some misunderstanding within this paragraph. So let me rephrase what I understood from here. So it is comparing two people. One is a manual worker, just doing let's say work which would put that person into, let's say, a dirty job. This person is, since he's working hard work with, I don't know, like plumber sort of a work, or a farmer. So the environment that this person works is a dirty environment. So for this person, and also he is working in environments which are more isolated. So these are the two conditions for this first example person. The second example person is a person living in a city life. So these are the two comparisons, just to make sure we are on the same page. For the first one, he said, the author mentions two rulings about this first person regarding wudu. One says, if you are going to touch a woman, your wudu is going to be void And the reasoning he gives for this one is because that person, since he is living in isolated places, he might geared towards passing the boundaries and then just trying to get the boundaries of Sharia in terms of intermingling with a woman who is not halal to him. So by putting that ruling over there, not for that person not to even get close to that woman, Sharia says don't even think about it, because if you touch, your wudu is going to be void. So it puts a boundary in between the two, protecting the woman in this case, and also the man, from entering a unlawful relationship. So this boundary is not about women being dirty, men being dirty. This is not the point. The point here is, since such a worker is working in conditions in which it is isolated environment, and a man and a woman in an isolated environment is going to be dangerous if, if you know that in any moment somebody can knock the door and come in, it wouldn't be that much dangerous. But if you are in a farmland and you are the only person and this lady is the other person over there, and you know that within 1 hour's distance, nobody is around you. So such a condition is a dangerous condition for humans' nafs. I wouldn't trust myself in such a case. So for people living in such a setup, the ruling is saying that by putting a rule to the extent of saying that don't even touch, if you touch, your wudu is going to be void, is putting another extra layer of protection over there, just, if you like, as an exclamation mark in my world, saying that don't do it, don't even think about it. And as for the cleanliness, so this second one is, let me see. So the other one is about, for the istinja part that Atik was mentioning, this first person, again, the manual worker, the environment that person lives in is due to the conditions, like it's dusty or muddy and whatnot. So the dirt is common in that environment. But cleanliness is important, but that person, due to his work environment, is more prone to just be more negligent about cleanliness. In order to increase the attention of that person in this setup, Sharia says even one droplet of your urine on your clothes is going to be preventive for your prayer. So be clean. Don't even have one droplet of urine in your clothes. But as for the second person, the city person, so he says in a city environment, let's say you are in your office and then a lady comes in. So in such a setup, within half a minute's distance or a few seconds distance, or even your neighboring offices hearing your voices, in such a setup, your nafs is going to be much less geared towards transgressing the boundaries. So in such a setup, Sharia says, okay, it's okay if you touch that person. Like, it's not saying that, oh yeah, go and touch. It's not like this. But if a touch occurs, it's not going to violate your wudu. So that extra boundary that was put for the first person, for the first example, is not necessary. So you are okay without such a boundary. And then he gives the example of that cleanliness for the clothes. So if in such a city setup, since you are already a man of city life, and in city life people are generally more careful about their clothing, so this extra emphasis by Sharia for the cleanliness is not necessary, so it's dropped. So this is what is being mentioned in here. Otherwise, I don't think this text in any shape or form saying that women are dirty, this is why when you touch them you need to clean yourself or whatever. And then like the other about the cleanliness part, it's about the urine that is on the cloth. So just to clarify and to make sure we are on the same page.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Yeah, that was helpful for me as well. Any other comments or questions about this passage? Sohail, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just to, kind of essentially what Yusuf was saying, but to me, here the reason for anything or for what he's saying is my sort of spiritual state or my consciousness. So, like, wudu is, while I do wudu kind of unconsciously, truthfully speaking, most of the time, but it has a conscious aspect to it. And there is, if I'm aware of it, there's a very conscious aspect towards it. And, the Sharia is there to preserve my sort of spiritual state or my awareness or consciousness of God. And certain environments dictate how aware or conscious am I. For example, praying in a mosque where the Prophet says, I don't know what he says, in congregation, I think he says 27 times better, if I believe. Somebody asked, well, what's the difference between praying with somebody or without somebody? But it's to me, it's always about more my state of awareness or consciousness of where I am and who I'm praying towards and who am I standing before. And it's potentially even more pronounced or more aware, or I'm more aware of my sort of like universal prayer with other people. And to me, that's the point of why he would make a statement like that. Or in this case, why in certain situations, certain jurists would say this may, I don't want to say like make you impure per se, but because physically, maybe because in the two situations, one person is impure and another person is not. So it's not necessarily physical per se. It's more so my state of awareness or consciousness. Because wudu, I mean, I could take, I don't have to make wudu. I don't even have to be Muslim, and I could do the same thing, and it doesn't mean anything. And it's not like I even wash my whole body when I do wudu. So there is a sort of inward aspect. It's not just like there's a semi sort of like heavenly aspect to it. And to me, that's the point of what I think he's saying here is that the reason why in this situation it may be appropriate to remake my wudu, and in this situation is not as crucial, is because of the point of maintaining my spiritual consciousness or awareness potentially. Because if the reason were, if urine here is impure but it's not impure in another situation, then how is that equitable? Like where's the equitability here? Because there isn't then. Like you can't, like either urine is impure always or it's not. I mean, you can't really have it both ways. And I think that to me is sort of the underlying reason for anything of the Sharia is my sort of spiritual state or awareness of God and my submission towards him. And anything that detracts me from that sort of breaks my, if you can say, my wudu, or sort of my consciousness. And wudu is like sort of my means of entering that sort of spiritual state of awareness or consciousnness, if I am aware of it. But that's the idea or point behind it, at least to me. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Sohail. Yeah, I mean, this is also along the lines of what I was trying to say earlier. And that in so much as I'm concerned, I mean, wudu is first and foremost, I do it because it's a command, right? I don't need to look for specific reason or wisdom. But also I see that in terms of my everyday life, it is a process of reorienting my state of being, my mindset, my worldview. When I make wudu, right, I am reminded that, well, when I first make the intention for it, I make the intention for it because I know that it's a command. And that command reconnects me to my creator, to my source of existence. And again, ideally, I mean, I also, we often, I guess, do it on autopilot, but it acts as a means of reminding me of my status in existence, of my reality in this world, which is that I'm being created, I'm being given existence, I'm being nurtured, I'm being sustained, and that all of this, becomes a means for me to enter into a dialogue with my creator, express my needs and find how his qualities manifested in this world can meet those needs that I have as a human being. But again, that this ablution, that this wudu, I guess in its essence for me, is about reorientation, is about me recognizing my status as an abd, right? And that here, all of these contexts or these examples that are being given is in which situations will I require wudu, in which situations will I need to be reoriented? And that does become a matter of lifestyle and circumstance and whatnot, and in which situations may a certain event or interaction not negatively impact my state of being, my God-centric worldview, my consciousness of my creator. I think for me, again, that's the essence of it. But thank you all for your comments and your questions. I think at this point I'm going to go on to read the dua, if there's no other comments. Okay. Thus, 2 drops from the ocean as examples for you. Make analogies with them, and if you can, balance them on the scales of the Sharia in this way, with the balance of Shairani's Mizan. Glory be unto you. We have no knowledge save that which you have taught us. Indeed, you are all-knowing, all-wise. O God, grant blessings and peace to the one in whom were embodied the lights of your love through the beauty of your attributes, the comprehensive mirror to the manifestations of your most beautiful names, in whom was focused the rays of your love for the art which is in your creatures, the most perfect and wonderful of your artifacts, who was a sample of the perfections of your art and an index of the beauties of your inscriptions, and who reflected the subtleties of your love and your desire that your art be appreciated, the most elevated herald of your fine art, who proclaimed in resounding voice admiration for the beauty of your inscriptions, the most wonderful praiser of the perfections of your art, who reflected together in his being the varieties of your love and your appreciation for the good morals of your creatures and the subtleties of your artifacts' qualities, comprehending all fine conduct and good morality through your favor and the subtleties of commendable attributes through your grace, who was the most excellent criterion and measure of everything you mentioned in your criterion of truth and falsehood, the Quran, those whom you love from among the righteous, the patient, the believers, those who fear you, who turn to you, and who repent, and all the classes of those whom you infuse with your life and honor through your love in your criterion of truth and falsehood, until they become as the leader of those whom you love, the master of those beloved by you and chief of your beloveds, and grant blessings and peace to all his family and companions and brothers. Ameen. Through your mercy, O most merciful of the merciful. And that concludes the 27th word, but next week, inshallah, we can continue with the addendum to the 27th word. And I'm going to end here, inshallah. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal